a drove of pubescent girls and boys pulled up on their Schwinn bicycles to the only movie theater within miles. They piled into the auditorium, taking up an entire row of seats, to the dismay of other moviegoers and staff. But they couldn't sit apart. They were family. My 13 cousins and I, to be exact. We were seeing the premiere of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and I couldn't tell you anything about it, because I didn't watch the movie at all that day. Instead, I was preoccupied by my cousins, who sat together just so, their faces illuminated by trailers of upcoming movies. And that's when I noticed it. They each had a fairly prominent chin. Immediately, I began my own self-inspection. Rounded, subtle, not at all prominent. I couldn't tell you why I was drawn to this feature, but upon my discovery, I spent the entire duration of the film fidgeting with it, pulling at it to look like theirs, so if someone were to walk down the aisle and see my family, it would be a perfect arrangement of kin. Very odd story, I know. But you should have been there the moment I realized none of them were Chinese. Yes, I was adopted internationally from China at 11 months old into a white American family. And for the longest time, that was the only identity I could claim with certainty. Because growing up, I should clarify, was less about realizing that none of my family was Chinese, and more about accepting the fact that I was not, and never would be, white. Which was a hard thing to do, because the way we tend to view culture and race as a people doesn't really allow for someone like me. Often, we attach objective truth to these characteristics that divide us, and that informs how we see ourselves and treat each other. Take the notion Asians are naturally good at math, for instance. There's an observable basis to this claim. I personally know several Asians that excel in math. But being excellent at math is not inherent to being Asian. Just ask any math teacher that has ever had me as a student. While this example might seem harmless or even good-natured, it stems from a dangerous but prevalent practice, one that perpetuates and creates a troubling mentality of us versus them and suppresses the multi-valence that humanity has to offer. At 9 years old, though, there was no other way, so the life of chin-pulling continued. I stretched myself out every night to be as tall as my 6'3" father. I drew freckles on my face with my mother's eyebrow pencil. I opened my eyes as wide as I possibly could before taking any picture. I prayed to be white, to prove to myself that I belonged in my family, and to prove to all the other people that had asked, "Where are you really from?" that I was just as American as them. To me, race meant culture, and culture decided whether or not you belonged or you were a perpetual foreign. And actually, this is not new or uncommon. In fact, whiteness was once essential to cultural belonging in this country, not long after its founding. In 1790, Congress passed an act of naturalization that granted citizenship only to free white immigrants. Following this, many minorities tried to naturalize, and nearly all of them argued for their whiteness before a court that was presided over by all white men. One of those people was Japanese pioneer Takao Ozawa, who, in 1922, petitioned the Supreme Court for naturalization under the claim that his skin was just as white as Caucasian skin, and that beliefs, not race, should determine our citizenship. In name, I am not an American, but at heart, I am a true American. These are the words Ozawa said in the brief that he wrote himself. He learned English, was schooled here, raised his children with an American lifestyle. He even went to Christian church on Sundays clad in Western clothing. But the Supreme Court ruled that only Caucasians were deemed as white in the eyes of the law. And according to the best-known science, Ozawa was of the Mongolian race and thusly ineligible for citizenship. Just 3 months later, when another immigrant who was not white-skinned argued scientifically that he was of the Caucasian race, the court went back on this reasoning to say that whiteness was not scientifically reasoned, but rather popularly understood by the common man. Even embedded in the transcripts of the highest court in the land, we see examples of human beings using race and culture to assert universal truths, and using those universal truths to justify behaviors of exclusion and hierarchy. Those racial requirements weren't abolished until 1952. To give this historical context, we sooner found a niche for slinkies in this country before we did other people of other races and cultures. Nearly a century has passed since those monumental Supreme Court cases. And despite status of citizenship, being raised by third-generation Americans, and spending all but 11 months of my life here, I am still being questioned about where I truly belong. Americans only see me as Asian, and Asians only see me as American. So I wondered then, what does it take to belong? According to a global research study done by Pew Research Center, conducted in 2016, called What It Takes to Truly Be One of Us, the answer is ability to speak national language. A median of 70% of surveyed Americans of various backgrounds agreed to this. Now, I realize for the high-achieving scholars in the room, a 70 is nothing to write home about. But here's what's mind-boggling. America doesn't have an official national language, and the one that is most predominantly spoken in this country didn't even originate here. But let's say, in this scenario, that we accept that English is our national language. Does this include all of the sub-languages and cultural dialects? Well, considering one such dialect was once called non-standard Negro English, likely it does not. Even in a world where we are much more globalized, where we are much less confined by geography and culture is now considered transnational and nuanced, we are still experiencing discrepancies in our lived reality. But this is not about race or culture, but rather what those things, among others, reveal about how we see ourselves and how we treat others. It applies to every single person. And the moment that we point fingers and think that it doesn't is the moment that this deeply ingrained, often unnoticed habit becomes more threatening and less noticeable. But we can break habits. Even in order to imagine a world without these issues, we must first, as individuals, address the world that we live in today by making visible the surreptitious practices and challenging the way that we are through conscious actions reflective of the way that we want to be. Being adopted, I always simultaneously felt as though I belonged to many worlds and to no world at all. In a society where purity is valued, I deeply resented this aspect of who I was. I suppressed parts of myself that I thought others didn't like to promote a version of myself that I felt was untrue, just to allow myself to feel like I deserved a place in this world. But in growing up, in learning more, and valuing the perspective of being part of an interracial family where I am the only one who makes this family interracial, I've realized that we are multifaceted creatures that have more in common as humans with each other than any other creature in the world. But because of these preordained assumptions that we have for ourselves and for others, we will never see this. It was in recognizing this that I learned to stop praying to be white and start embracing who I really am, an Asian who is not naturally good at math. Thank you very much.